I hope you took a few minutes to check out our expo and our sponsors, as well as network with some of the other participants. I know I sat in the networking session and talked to a few people, so thank you for participating that way. I'd like to introduce our guest for our fireside chat. This is Stephen Haroun. Stephen is the Chief Compliance and Enforcement Officer, or the CCEO, with the CRTC. Stephen and I have been working together for a number of years around anti-spam legislation, feedback, reporting, even in regards to how did the industry react to Castle, and really just developed a good friendship. And what we've decided we're going to do is just have a fireside chat. We're going to talk about some of the things that are happening, what the commission's been up to for the last year. For those of you that were attended last year, we had a great update from Neil, who works with Stephen, that talked about some of the things going on with Castle and other efforts within the CRTC. And I'm really excited that Stephen's here, and I know that Stephen, you probably recognize a handful of names that have also been participating throughout the day. But did you want to just give like a brief background of what your role is with the CRTC and sort of how you engage with the community?
Oh no, absolutely. So thanks for the opportunity. I like to have, it's always good to have a chat with industry folks. And thank you for not putting the big flames behind me, because earlier folks during a trial run, I said, oh, but there's no fire. And Matt offered to put up a background of fire, but it looked like I was like, being burned in effigy or something. So thanks for that. I appreciate that. So as Matt said, so I'm the Chief Compliance and Enforcement Officer, and I have likely met some or many of you at different events regarding Castle or email or enforcement and all those fun things that we do. So at the CRTC, I lead an enforcement team that is responsible for Canada's anti-spam legislation, but also for the unsolicited telecommunications rules, the National Do Not Call list, as well as the voter contact registry. So I've been in this role about 3 years now. And I've brought perhaps a little bit of a different perspective than some of my predecessors, and that's just due to the way programs evolve and timing and all those good things. So I really take the compliance piece. I always say I'm the Chief Compliance and Enforcement Officer, so I really focus on compliance a lot, and I've had my folks focus on that, because ultimately when we're dealing with legitimate businesses in Canada, what they want to do is they want to comply with the legislation. They want to comply with the regulations. They just want to know how, and they just want to know what they need to do, and I've heard on many occasions, especially when we start talking small and medium enterprises, they will stop and tell me, like, I've got 15 minutes a week to deal with everything Castle, so tell me what I need to do. So we really focus a lot with stakeholders and industry players on just what the regulations are, what you need to do, what you need to have in place to ensure that you're not breaking any of the rules. And for sure, some of the major big companies, they've got a team of people, and when you start talking small companies, you've got one guy who's got 15 minutes. So so we really do have to be flexible, right? So even though the rules and regulations are the same across the board, they really are flexible for the user, flexible to implement. So we really do try to keep that piece in place. Of education and outreach, myself and my team, to various groups. So we tend to do a lot of kind of organizations like this, on conferences and events, and with the Law Society and the business societies, and a plethora of people, where we do kind of do that outreach. We've also really tried to focus a lot on what does this mean for Canadians. I come from a consumer policy, strategic policy background at the CRTC. I've been at the CRTC a few years, probably too many, some would say. So I've really tried to put that focus on, but what does this mean for Canadians who call and complain? or they fill out the form online and they say, okay, I'm getting this email spam. I'm worried about this. I'm concerned about that. So we've really tried to focus our communications outwards when we settle enforcement cases as well. so that people understand, like, oh, that actually, I got that email or I got that phone call. I know this is primarily email, but even on the telemarketing side, oh, I'm glad to see that that my complaint, that my concerns were addressed. So it's often not easy, it's often not easy in the email space. We deal with everything from, company X sending you an email, please, look at our flyer this week, please buy this, please do that, all those types of things. But then we're really blessed on the Castle front in that, our legislation goes very broad. So we can deal with malware and viruses and botnets and what I call all the cool, sexy stuff in this space from an enforcement perspective. But I think, that's not necessarily evident to Joe and Jane Canadian. That all of a sudden that they've clicked on a link, they're looking at this video, or they've downloaded a particular thing that they wanted to see, but now all of a sudden there's a virus or botnet on their computer. So, so we really need to find that balance, One of the things we've done over the last couple of years, which I'm sure Neil mentioned last year to this audience, was, we've really tried to focus our enforcement efforts and our compliance efforts from a more strategic perspective. Obviously, we'll always have company X and Y trying to email you, perhaps legitimately, perhaps not. And obviously we have to address that. But we really do want to focus on where is the biggest impact for Canadians. And sometimes that is that, if you will, the unseen stuff. So it is the malware and the botnets and the viruses and all those types of things that are perhaps behind the scenes for Joe and Jane Canadian, but have a huge impact on, Canadians in this space, but also on their ability to participate in the digital economy from a safety perspective. So we focus a lot on protecting Canadians. We focus on educating the industry. We focus on trying to make it real for Canadians. And we're a small but mighty team, so we have to make some strategic decisions on, where we focus our compliance efforts and where we focus our enforcement efforts.
Sure, no, and that's great, because I obviously watch very closely the efforts that your team's doing when it comes to, different enforcement actions or different things showing up in the media. And I think one of the ones, if there were two that sort of stood out to me recently, one would be the enforcement action and the investigation your team did into the remote access Trojan software, or RAT software. Which is prolific and very bad in regards to the number of sort of pieces of malware that could get delivered that way remotely over the internet, but also even the work that you did with the malware being distributed through advertisement, online advertisement, which having a background a bit in sort of the ad world as well, with email, like next to email, that one sort of hit home for me too, because I do have a number of friends that work sort of in the ad world. Could you talk about, like, when you were looking, at that type of enforcement, and, what was the reason that you chose that over, say, Joe Spammer from Regina or something like that, that maybe would be as equally bad, when you're making those types of decisions, and just sort of the, some of the thought process that goes into that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And those are probably two of our more predominant cases in the last couple of years. So thank you for raising those. When we look at the most recent, so with Orcus Technologies, so last year we issued a notice of violation for $115,000 on this company and the primary principals, because they had, they had developed, they had marketed, they had sold this remote access Trojan, with I was gonna say with disregard for all good citizenship, but they literally had developed it to be a nefarious thing. So we, when we look at case selection, back to kind of that case selection perspective, it's like, we're primarily complaints driven, but we also have various sources of intelligence, that we buy, that we purchase, that we share. We've got great international partnerships around the world. We're a member of Usenet, which probably many of your members are familiar with, but also we have memorandums of understanding with about 16, 17 countries around the world now, and their various regulators or law enforcement agencies. So when this one kind of, landed on our plate of like, okay, this is really bad activity, we had several, complaints looking at this, and then we started kind of gathering the intelligence around that. And then we realized it was like multi-jurisdictional. So if you go to that case on our website, www.crtc.gc.ca. I should practice saying that faster, but if you look at our website and you look at the case summary for that, it was multi-jurisdictional. So we worked with the RCMP, we worked with the FBI, we worked with the Australian Federated Police. So we executed warrants in tandem at the same time in different time zones. Not the easiest thing to coordinate it, in case you're wondering. But we also worked with them just to finalize our case with Orcus Technology. So it was a really good, back to my my intro, just about what's impacting the Canadians the most. So we're worried about, as you said, Joe Spammer sitting in his basement in Brampton, Ontario, Calgary, Alberta, Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'll try to be nationwide here. Just sending, random spams and like, whatever. Or do I want to worry about the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who probably have this Trojan on their computer, siphoning away all their personal information, all their financial information, and then selling it on the dark web? Where should we be concerned? So it was a complicated, without question, a complicated case. It required a lot of coordination, but the results of that were incredible. And I'll even go back to even just when we executed the warrant on this particular individual in Canada, up in the dark web, if you will, like an hour after we executed the warrant, he was already on the dark web saying, "Oh, I just got raided. Don't use this rat anymore," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, so even if personally, I shouldn't say this out loud, but even if we'd never gotten to a place where we issued a notice of violation and we issued a fine and all that type of thing, the activity stopped, pretty much, because basically he put a signal to the world, sorry if you bought this, but, I've just been, served with a warrant. So, buyer beware at that point, I guess. So the results were incredible, let alone the whole RCMP and other jurisdictions, the types of charges that would be placed on those individuals, potentially.
And I think we've seen some of those, other efforts in the past, even where there was a large botnet taken down, and the CRTC was involved with the RCMP and the FBI, and I think because it happened sort of globally all at once, because these machines are sort of in multiple different jurisdictions, which gives them redundancy. So even that coordination is got to be just incredible in how you guys manage that.
No. And I'll go to, sorry, Matt, but I will go to kind of that Sunlight and Data Blocks file that you mentioned, which was really about that, the distribution on these advertising platforms. I'll do a caveat. I mean, this one is before the commission for review. The parties involved were not overly happy with me when we served them with a notice of violation with penalties. But the crux of that case at the end of the day is, and it goes to kind of where we talk about from a compliance standpoint, and where we talk about, often in this space about, well, what's my liability and where are my concerns? I hired someone to do this. It's not my fault. Those types of things. This is a really good case, in the Sunlight and Data Blocks case. Again, just go to our website and we can provide some links and stuff, just to look at the investigation summary, where it's not only that, they use their platform to distribute these bad things, if you will, but they did it willingly. So it's a really good case. The Sunlight and Data Blocks is a really great case for Section 9 of CASL, which, if for those of you who don't know, it's like the aiding and abetting clause, which often difficult to prove, right? I mean, in any kind of system of justice, aiding and abetting is a little more challenging than someone who actually did it. But they're a really good case of where they have been told on multiple occasions by law enforcement agencies in Canada and in other jurisdictions where, like, this is bad activity, you need to take it down, you need to stop doing this. And they willingly went out and marketed it more and sold it more. So, so they, they use their platform. Yes, it was, the argument might be that, well, they were just a vehicle. But even if you're just the vehicle in this space, if someone tells you that someone's doing something bad using your vehicle, then you need to stop driving. That's the ultimate, the ultimate thing there. So, I think that's a really good case in that, from that perspective of, if you want to if you want to ensure you're safe, A, make sure you know what your, the vendors and stuff you do or know what they're doing. But B, if the vendor now knows something that you've been doing, which is nefarious, that they're not, they just can't walk out and say, well, I was just doing what they paid me for. That's great until someone advises you that, well, what they're paying you for is actually illegal and against the law.
Right. And I think that's a big difference that a lot of platforms, under sort of even the can't spam model versus the castle model, can't spam, there's a pretty broad exemption, at least for sort of the email technology vendors under the legislation, whereas castle does have that, liability. And you actually kind of touched on it already, where the liability extends into, beyond the corporation and into the directors or into the, senior management of the company that is actively and knowingly participating or allowing these things to occur. So you kind of skipped ahead on a couple of the questions that we had pre-planned, but the Section 9 stuff I was going to talk about later. But when it comes to record keeping, this is a big one that I've done presentations on before, sort of the information you should keep, and then balancing that against sort of data privacy. What type of advice do you give to people that maybe you're in communication with, saying, we think you maybe have committed a violation or we're investigating you. I want to see these types of records, and then sort of the data retention on those records that would be required for an investigation. What type of advice do you have for people on that?
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to, so we obviously have lots of FAQs on good do's and don'ts and good record keeping practices available on our website. Just go to CRTC, type Castle. We've got a really great Castle page. And I'll do a little side pitch here now. Like, we've actually just introduced over the last year, we have a Castle enforcement actions page that we update twice a year on just telling you kind of what activities we've undertaken, what investigations we've completed, what kind of complaints we're seeing, where those complaints are coming from, all those types of things. So it's a really great dashboard, and we update it twice a year. We're soon due, at the end of September is kind of the end of our first half, so we'll be updating it probably in November. But it's a really great dashboard, and you go back and forth a couple of periods, which is really great. So I'll put it out there as it's a really good place for resources, just the Castle page on our website, but then also that Castle Enforcement Advisory kind of gives you updates on what we've been doing in the last 6 months. I can't probably stress enough, and it's interesting that you say that. I mean, one of the things we get asked about a lot is, what kind of record keeping do I need to do? And then on the other side, if you look at, on Castle, we get like 7,000 complaints a week. That's a lot. Business hasn't slowed. It's only gotten more.
No.
But we get 7,000 complaints a week. What's the number one complaint in those? The number one reason for those complaints? Consent. What I tell people, from a data retention perspective, is keep good records. So if you're a big multi-conglomerate company, you've got, you probably have systems that can do that. You've got a team of people who can do that. And it really is, when did you get their consent that you could email them for marketing purposes? And I'll stress that because I'll use an example in a bit, which is different. But then, but when did they unsubscribe from that? When did they say, I no longer want to get your stuff, Matt, thanks, but you email me every day telling me you've got another $9.99 item for sale. Don't want it. Don't want to hear about it anymore. But then the question comes, like, how long do I keep it? What do I do with it? Where do I put it? And you're right, Matt. Like, when we come knocking, and it makes it sound very ominous, but if you receive, if you receive a letter from my team saying, oh, by the way, we're conducting an investigation. We want your records, for the past 3 years on, subscribes, unsubscribes, etc. You are obligated to provide that. It's in federal legislation. You are obligated to. I can ask for it. My team can ask for it, and you're obligated to provide it. There are no prescribed rules, very honestly, on how long you should keep that information, right? I mean, it it takes up space. If it's digital, it takes up space, and if it's paper, it takes up even more. Let's be realistic. So I guess what I would offer up as advice is, your taxes are 7 years. Do I think you need to keep it for 7 years? Probably not. But realistically, I don't think it's logical if you look at what your business is, and if you're in this, email marketing business, for lack of a better term, we use that as the catch-all phrase. If you're in this space, then probably 30 days isn't long enough either, right? Because realistically, I can, knock on your door and say, I want the last 5 years worth of data. And you might tell me I only have 2, and, and that's probably okay if you can prove to me why you only have 2. Which probably gets me to my next point of so keep it for a reasonable amount of time. Think about your business, think about your customers, think how long people stay, think about it. Are they one-offs, or, or are you, I'm trying to be really good today, not use names. I always use names and then I get in trouble, or are you XYZ on the corner who gets the same customers every day, every week, every month, every year after year? Your retention strategies probably needs to be longer there, right? Because, you have that longevity versus the $9.99 thing that was sold at midnight, that you had 14 minutes to, get a second one free for. So think about those things, right? If it's a one-off customer, or if it's multiple, if it's a frequent kind of repeat pattern. I think the best way around that, as I said, if you only have 2 years worth of records, and that's, and I would go, okay, can you prove that to me, as the CCEO? Have good IM policies. So have good information management policies and have them documented. Obviously, you can't document that, you can't write your IM policy the same day you get my letter saying I want a year's worth of data, and then you write your IM policy that says, oh, we only keep it for 24 hours, sorry. But be practical, have written down information management policies. We'll keep that. Obviously, you need to keep this consent forever, as long as they consent realistically, because you want to have proof at one point in time, especially if they're a frequent customer per se. But then on the other side of it is you want to keep that unsubscribe, so that when you say, well, look, they didn't unsubscribe until this date. This happens in cases, right? So someone says, oh, I should never got these emails, in the month of January. And then what happens is we find out oh, well, actually you didn't unsubscribe until February, and those are, if you will, simple, open and close cases, right? Oh, I've got all these complaints saying January, the provider has said, oh, well, no, here's all the, unsubscribes. They happened after the date, presumably, after the 10-day waiting period, that you have to unsubscribe someone. But, so I think it's A, it's being realistic, B, it's keeping good records, but C, have documented information management, and do that now and say, you know what, we're going to keep everything for 2 years, and after 2 years, I'm going to delete it. And at least then when we say, I want 5 years, and you say, I only have 2, here's why, and you've got, an IM policy dated from 8 years ago that says every 2 years we do a purge, that's an acceptable, due diligence defense, if you will, in my view.
Right. And then just beyond sort of Castle, there's a question that's come in around the do not call list. It's a bit older than Castle. It's been around a bit longer, but is there a retention period defined in do not call? I'll admit I'm a little unclear on do not call. I've never done telemarketing, so just as a consumer, I've registered on it. That's all.
Do you still get phone calls?
Yeah, sure. My duct cleaners call every week, and lately I've been having the Chinese Rogers people call, which I don't believe is actually them, but they're trying to.
You don't think it's Rogers?
I'm
you can be sure to ask Deborah later. Be sure to ask Deborah later if they've.
I've definitely had those conversations with her in the past where you get random phone calls claiming to be from your telco. So we've definitely had that conversation, being that they're not legit. But from the do not call side, right, is there a retention period defined? Would it make sense to, if there is, to align the two together as a consumer business?
We definitely, I guess it would make sense. Again, there's no prescribed period, right? The benefit of the, the do not call list, it actually is the third party who operates the do not call list for us, which is great. So they maintain all those records. It comes down to, often on the do not call list side, where it comes down to is, for many of our investigations is, what area code did they purchase the do not call list for? Did they refresh it every month? Often people buy a list once, and I won't say often. In many situations, a less than established telemarketer will buy the list once and then use it for years, months, whatever, when actually it's only valid for 30 days. Or they buy a 1-year subscription, but they actually never update it, right? You have to update it every month because the list gets updated every day, actually. We had an interesting case recently where a customer, he was a small little guy, but he was updating his list every day. It was actually taking him longer because he was in a rural area. It was taking him longer to update the list every day than it was to actually make the calls he needed to make. But he was so paranoid because he had been caught once for not updating the list that all of a sudden he just does it automatically every morning, updates the list. That's probably a little excessive, but often it comes down to, like, did you buy the right area code? Did you exceed the expiry date? Those types of things. And I won't get into the more nefarious activities where people buy the list to use the list to call people, but that's on a different side of the spectrum. But you're right. If we were looking at from a consumer protection piece, but even from a stakeholder industry, if all those dates were aligned, that would obviously be, be of use for sure.
Okay, so sort of one contact policy, if you will, regardless of platform, would be something that you would recommend.
Oh no, absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to mention. So we were talking about, if you're email marketing someone, so you have that relationship, you have consent to do that, right? Which is what we're talking about. One of the things I want to raise recently, and we've updated some of our guidance to give some good examples of this, but on our website. But think about it. If you offer to, for example, which happens all the time now everywhere I go, oh, do you want an e-receipt? Well, an e-receipt, so I go to company X and I go, yeah, I'm just going to throw it out anyway, just email it to me. That actually doesn't give you, it is unlikely when you click, yes, send me an e-receipt, because typically there's no long list of things that you're agreeing to. Typically that's just like, email me my receipt. That is not an instantaneous, you can email market me now. And you can send me an email every day selling me something for $9.99. So could you use that e-receipt to say, would you like to receive future marketing, and then have with all the qualifiers, and then have them tick the box when they've opened up their e-receipt? For sure, that's getting that explicit consent. But just sending them an e-receipt doesn't mean all of a sudden that you can, oh, yes, we can do that now.
There's another question here that's an interesting one. And it's sort of two questions, but it's really sort of one. So for people that violate for Castle and the do not call, are you seeing a lot of foreign-based reports on violations, or do you guys mostly focus on just domestic?
It's a good question. I was going to say, so I'll answer it in two ways. How's that? Since it's kind of a two-part question. So one, obviously, I have domestic legislation, in a global world, right? I mean, be it telemarketing or be it anti-spam. I mean, it's global. I need if you will, I need a Canadian hook. So obviously there is telemarketing going on around the world. There is email spam going on around the world. That has no Canadian hook to it. Like there's no Canadian company sitting in a warehouse somewhere. There's no particular individual living in whatever jurisdiction in Canada. So that makes it extremely challenging to try and pursue that. There's nothing saying that I can't, because at the end of the day, Canadians are getting that phone call or Canadians are getting that email, and it's doing horrible things. We'll assume it's doing horrible things to their computer. There's nothing saying that I can't. The problem is, how do I enforce that? Right? So that's where it becomes a little bit tricky and comes back to that strategic decision, on impact on Canadians. So would it stop a bunch of Canadians from getting that phone call or from getting that email? Absolutely. Can I actually stop the activity from happening in another jurisdiction? I can have all the MOUs I want around the world with law enforcement agencies, but it is challenging, obviously, to kind of work in another jurisdiction and try to apply Canadian legislation. Now, I was going to say, you gave me a really good segue, because one of the things I often talk about when I speak is, there's a really, as much as it's in some ways very strange that the enforcement arm is within the regulator, there is a real advantage from this perspective to us being embedded within the regulator. And I'll use telemarketing as an example. And, you know, I do think we'll evolve this way on the Castle front as well, but we're not quite there yet. But, you know, on the telemarketing side, obviously lots of telemarketing calls come from jurisdictions around the world. Often, you know, we can see those on our call display, right? You know, we get a phone call that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Well, that is not a valid telephone number. You know, that should technically never answer, you know, get to your phone line because it's not a valid number. So clearly it's, clearly it's not verified. So what we've done actually on the telemarketing side, as of December of last year, we introduced universal call blocking, where, you know, telecommunications service providers in Canada actually have to block those types of calls that are clearly outside, you know, a normal telephone call. So back to that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, your phone should not be ringing anymore with those kind of digits on your call display. Because we gave the telecom service providers A, authority, and B, mandated that they have to do it as a provider in Canada to block those calls. One of the other things we're working on, and actually we just extended the deadline kind of semi-COVID related, semi-technology related, is a protocol in the telemarketing slot called Stir Shaken, which is a really good acronym if you like martinis. And it has a really great long name, which I won't even try to remember what it is. No, I have to say I don't have my cheat sheet. That's the problem with video. I don't have my cheat sheet here. You know, what it does actually, it's really call authentication. And what that's gonna do, you know, basically is your phone's gonna ring. And it really comes into play when people are spoofing your phone number, right? So you think it's your bank calling you, but it's actually not your bank. It's, you know, it's Joe Buddy just trying to get you to log into your, you know, your bank account while he's on the other side of the phone and siphoning out all your money while you're talking to him, thinking you're talking to the bank. But what it will do is when that number comes through and it's a spoof call from your bank, this authentication process, which takes microseconds, like it, you know, you never even know what's happening, but it's going to come up with a, you know, on your call display, this is verified, this is CIBC, or it's going to say, this call is suspect. We could not verify it. So that at least when you pick up the phone, I can't stop those calls from coming through. Universal call blocking kind of does all the malform number stuff. So that's kind of easy for TSPs to, you know, to block. I can't stop these spoof calls from coming through, but I can let you know before you pick up the phone if it's 100% verified. Yes, Stephen, it's Matt calling you, you know, etc. Or it's probably not Matt, you know, like they haven't figured out the whole X's and check marks and all that kind of thing, but it's going to give you some level of, you know, comfort, you know, in that, okay, I know that this is Matt calling me, or yeah, someone's just trying to use Matt's number because they know I like him and I'll answer the phone and I'll probably do anything for Matt. So, you know, it's those types of things. So that really works, you know, we have to do that from a regulatory perspective. So, you know, being kind of the enforcement guy on these files, it's actually nice to have a regulatory vehicle. And I just call it, you know, that's one other tool I have. And we haven't even gotten kind of into all the tools that we have, but, you know, but from all the tools, from a warning letter to being able to execute warrants, to be able to, you know, ask for information when I want it and ask you to preserve information, saying, oh, I've got this case, don't delete anything from now until I get back to you, you know, those preservation demands and stuff like that. We have all those tools available to us in an investigation. And then from an enforcement perspective, obviously we have, you know, the ability to impose compliance programs and you know, impose amps and those types of things. So we have a really good swath of tools under CASL legislation and UTR legislation. But then I call it my, you know, my regulatory hammer at the end of the day. If I can't fix it through enforcement, then I'll just regulate it if I can. Yeah, my regulatory colleagues on later panels today may not agree with that approach, but you know, in the end, you know what? In the end, as much as, you know, everything costs money, and your folks know that, you know, and even that 15 minutes a day to maintain a, you know, a subscriber unsubscribe list and those things, that all costs money. But, you know, I do believe most legitimate companies at the end of the day are willing to invest that to protect their customers, to protect Canadians.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were talking about Shake and Stir, and I know a little bit about it. or stir shaken, whatever the name of it is.
It's shake and stir in the US, and we call it stir shaken. I guess we're bigger Bond fans. I'm not sure.
Depends what side of the board you're on, I guess. It sounds like a bit from, relating back because we're at an email conference, it sounds a bit more like sender ID or SPF, in regards to it's, these are my legitimate publishable phone numbers. Anything that comes through that doesn't validate against the list of some kind provided, assuming by the telco in this case. You're right. It doesn't necessarily stop the spoofing of the phone number in your same area code, but I will tell you, I haven't seen any of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 numbers in a while. I do get the odd random phone call from New Zealand, because for whatever reason, the call display comes through as +64, which is the country code, but as opposed to the local 647 area code. So it does, you can tell that those phone calls are usually broken as well. So there are a few other clues, I suppose. I've just stopped answering calls if you're not in my address book. So it made it easy. So I know we only have a couple minutes left. There is sort of one follow-up question that I wanted to ask around the e-receipt. Understanding that Castle does have an implied consent value of, I have made a purchase from you, or I've had a business transaction with you. Would your e-receipt not necessarily be that proof of business transaction to allow for an implied consent marketing to occur?
So it's an interesting perspective, and I know we've had this question before. Technically speaking, yes, you could say I have an existing business relationship with this person. They bought something, during the pandemic, and so yes, I have it. I always recommend people to get implied consent, like explicit consent. Sorry, I always recommend people get explicit consent, right? So because I don't think, well, I'm positive, actually. It's not even that I don't think. I am positive at the end of the day, if you're signing up, and we all do it, and I do it, I go to, company X, and they're like, oh, if you sign up for our emails, we'll give you 10% off today, whatever. Well, so you sign up on their little keypad, and you scroll through all the things that they say they're going to send you, and you tick the box and say yes, and you go, okay, yep. And then, 2 weeks later, I unsubscribe so that I can go back again and say, oh yeah, sign me up so I can get my 10% off, or whatever. So, you have to be religious on that, but that's why I have like 80,000 emails in my, spam email that I have for those types of things. But I always recommend getting explicit consent, because especially with the e-receipts now, there are no conditions. It's just like, would you like an e-receipt? Yes. Yes or no. And it's not, there are no conditions attached to that. So I guess for me, existing business relationship, yes, you can prove they purchased something. But for me, if you were going to do that e-receipt in order to market to them, you would be safer saying, oh, yes, you want an e-receipt? Please don't read all of this and click the box at the bottom, because at least then you can say, but they gave me their consent to email. So in my mind, I would say you've got the implied consent to email them to say, would you like to get more? That's where I would say. But you're right. Strict letter of the law, for sure, that would be considered implied consent. But that's only good for 2 years. So,
So there's a question here, and I'm pretty sure I already know the answer. But I always like asking this one to see if you've changed your opinion on this in regards to, as a service provider, would the CRTC ever release some type of anonymized data for service providers to understand if their networks are contributing to the 7,000 complaints a week that you see? I'm pretty sure I know the answer on this, but
what's the answer?
I'm pretty sure you're going to say no, because I've asked this question in the past. But it's probably been a year or so since I've asked, and maybe you've changed your opinion. But
So a couple things here. So go to our website and we can tell you what's happening. Every 6 months, we tell you what's been happening. So we tell you what type of complaints that are happening or whatever. And as a service provider, you can go, oh yeah, we're getting those same complaints. But from an intelligence perspective, so I have 3 different teams, right? I have a telemarketing team, I have a Castle team, but then I have an intelligence and analysis team. Because at the end of the day, we're intelligence-based enforcement. So some of that's complaints, but also some of that is where we get other pieces of information. So I can tell you on an intelligence perspective, I actually do think we'll get to a place where we'll start sharing generic, so anonymized is a good way. But I think, generic enough, like a lot of the campaigns are big enough, and a lot of the campaigns are specific enough that I think we could do some more generic sharing on those types of things, and just so that the providers have been very helpful. They have to comply with all these requests as well, right? When you think about almost any castle, or telemarketing kind of case, it's often the providers we go to first for data, right? Like we're going to say, you issue them a notice to produce a particular piece of information because it's either happened on their telephone network or it's happened over their internet network. So, the providers have been excellent supporters of the program. They've been, excellent supporters of trying to help us understand what's going on in their networks. And maybe it's good. And I know I'm cautious of time for you. Probably COVID is a really good example of that. If we get down to, in the past 6 months during the pandemic, about kind of the explosion, if you will, of COVID scams that happened, and that's everything from selling you, a fake thermometer or a fake test, or, something that you would never receive anyway, or, click on here to get your serve money faster, all those types of things. And, and I say explosion of complaints COVID related, wasn't actually an explosion of complaints. We're still getting about 7,000 a week. So what impresses me actually is the people doing these nefarious activities, how quick they were able to kind of turn around their business plan. Oh, I'm not going to sell them this anymore. I'm going to sell them a thermometer because, this is a way better, and not sell them a thermometer, but, at the end of the day. But, we worked a lot with the carriers, early days of just trying to understand these scams. And there were lots of scams on the telemarketing side as well, or just on the telephone network itself. And the providers in Canada were extremely supportive and extremely helpful. And I think actually that's helped us, build, if you will, a relationship that will help us moving forward from an intelligence perspective, because they're curious, yes, they talk among one another, but I think they're curious, like, is the CRTC seeing the same things on the network that we're seeing? But at the end of the day, there's also a huge advantage for them, right? If we can align ourselves on the type of, campaigns or problems on the network, and, we can resolve them for Canadians, but it's also a huge relief for providers as well, right? Because if we can eliminate this type of activity, it's quite fascinating, actually, how much bandwidth, if you will, be it on telephony or on email side, these scams take, and I'll use an example right now. Bell Media is doing actually a pilot project right now on the telephony side of, my cat decided he wanted to participate, sorry. On the telephony side, where they're blocking calls using artificial intelligence, of calls that they know, back to your Chinese Rogers, whatever, call, and they're using artificial intelligence to block calls, and they're blocking, tens of millions of calls a month in this pilot project, which is quite phenomenal when you think about that's calls that aren't actually getting through to a customer. So there'll be lots of details on that pilot once they wrap it up. It's on for 90 days, and we'll be able to share the results of that, but it's quite fascinating. So I think there's a win-win right now for for providers and for the CRTC and for Canadians. So it's a win-win-win. If we can all collaborate, share information, try and get to a place where we're kind of eliminating this type of activity, networks are cleaner, people trust the emails and trust the phone calls that they're getting.
Stephen, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us. I feel like I learned a ton of stuff today. I did actually, every time we talk, I learned something new. We do have our next session coming up immediately following this with Min Tran, talking about strategic road mapping for your email programs. Stephen, just one last thought. If someone had a question and they wanted to reach out to you or your team, what's the best way to do that for help? They can, obviously if they have, a general castle question, a general, telemarketing question, they can call the CRTC client services line, 1-888 something, go to our website.
but certainly folks should have zero concerns about emailing me directly if they have any questions or concerns, and all my info is available on the website as well. So by all means, we're happy to address those questions. Those things actually help us. They help us with our guidance, they help us with our enforcement actions, but they also even help us in updating our FAQs on the website of, things that people want to know about. And if we have a good solid answer that we can provide and clear direction, we'd like to be able to do that. So
great. Thank you once again. Hope you'll join us next year as well at the email
Absolutely.
summit. And as I mentioned, please join us in the next session with Minh Tran. And Stephen, once again, thank you for your time and participating in the Canadian Email Summit.
My pleasure. And hopefully we can do this in person next year.
I hope so too. Wash your hands and wear your masks.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Have a good one.